Tennessee. And part of the reason, I guess, why I'm here today is, uh, a year and a half ago at the start of COVID, I found myself getting sucked into advocacy work. And a lot of that had to do with how our governor was reacting at the time, or not reacting. And basically, what happened was, as we began to see that the crisis was growing, there were a group of physicians in our state who were appealing for initial stay-at-home order, and some initial reactions from the governor, who were being ignored. And they had done a petition. Nobody was responding from the governor's office. A lot of our traditional institutions here were afraid to be critical of the governor. But you know, but it mattered a lot to me because I had a wife who's an elementary school teacher, and three kids in middle and elementary school, who are all affected by the outcome of this work. Also had a father-in-law and his wife who were both nurses in Atlanta. And so having a government leaders that took this crisis seriously and responded appropriately was important. And like I mentioned, our governor here was not responding. And we had a phone call with a lot of supporters around the state, health professionals who were frustrated that nobody was listening to them. And so we quickly began to follow up with supporters, do some organizing work, invite others to organize with us. And over the course of 2 weeks, we did daily press events, um, uplifting stories of people in every media market around the state. Orchestrated probably over $12 million worth of earned media, and brought a lot of pressure on the governor. And ultimately, he listened and did the right thing, for a minute, and then hasn't since then. But a lot of the reason why I'm here is, over the last year and a half, or 2 years or whatever now, have been working on the advocacy side and organizing side, and hope to share some of the uh, training and curriculum that we're basing a lot of our work on. And the I guess the expectations for this session, what I'd like to do is introduce a few of the different concepts, um, and training modules that can be made available to you all. We'll share you on the Dropbox. You can take and run with them and use them if you want. Make them your own, and tweak them however you like. But I'd like to introduce you to a few different training modules on organizing and team building and why, and then make them available. The Much of what I'm going to go over is actually rooted in training from training from somebody named Professor Marshall Gans at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government, who really influenced a lot of the curriculum that I'm going to show. There's also a group called the Leading Change Network, which is a coalition of folks really plugged into this organizing space and have a lot to offer. But those are two great resources that I would suggest that a lot of what I'm going to show you came from. And so specifically, what I hope to show is talk a little bit about power mapping, team building, the use of stories and organizing, and relationship building and building teams. And this is also the first time for me using this technology kind of at this scale. So I do apologize in advance if I end up completely disconnecting the entire thing and hanging up on everybody. But with that, I will, I guess go ahead and see if there's any questions right off the bat, or see if, make sure I haven't muted myself. Alex, any feedback or questions on the expectation setting end of this?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. All right, I'm going to try to share my screen real quick. Oh, let's see. Oh, there's a chat room here. Hang on one second. I mentioned two organizations, the Leading Change Network and Professor Marshall Gans of Harvard's Kennedy School of Government. And following this, I will email out a Dropbox full of modules and resources from both places and a few others, actually. All right, so I'm going to try to share the screen real quick. 1 second. All right. Applying power mapping to tactics. Does that show up on everybody's screen? I guess I can see the chat box now, and that can be a good way to go back and forth here.
The screen share button is on the top right next to the gear with an arrow in a box. Top right of the OEA browser.
Okay, it says I am sharing it now. Does it show up for you?
Not yet. Are you presenting a slide deck on PowerPoint? You can always email that to
let me turn it off and back on.
Okay.
And see, it did work earlier. Hang on. Let's try this again.
Oh, so it did work. All right, that's a good sign.
Yeah, it did work earlier today. Let's see. Oh,
there we go.
Does it show up now?
Yep.
Huh. There you go.
I think you got it.
All right. Cool. All right. So, all right. So the goal for this section is I'm going to just introduce a training module on power mapping and kind of talk it through and talk through the exercise associated with it. So I hope to just kind of give a few minutes of upfront information and then attempt to do breakouts or maybe just debrief as a group and talk through how and why we use it in organizing. So let me see if this works. Okay. All right.
Did you wash my plate here?
Uh-huh. Oh. All right, cool. So, so the goal is revisit power mapping and its role in persuading decision makers, and take some time to learn from each other some various tactics on how we might leverage, power mapping in advocacy around COVID mitigation measures. So, I'll start with a question that I'd like to throw back out to everybody, and I guess feel free to just speak up or chime into the chat box. But what does it take to win an issue campaign? Why power mapping? I mean, or why should we map our decision makers and what influences them? And so and so let's just start there, and would love to see input from folks on the in the group. So what does it take to win? If winning may be not having a governor call a special session to eliminate every COVID protection in the state, or it might be instituting safety measures at a school. But what does it take to win? Go ahead and throw ideas in the chat box. Could I define power mapping? So, power mapping is basically mapping out who the decision makers are for the policy change you want, what influences them, and how to use that information in pressuring them to get done what you want to get done. Yeah, multi-layer coordinated strategy. What else? Figuring out what is most important to as many people as possible. Yep. getting a collective group to engage and participate, research and education to support your argument. Yes, all these things are right. I mean, and so, you know, whether your goal is, moving forward a policy change or stopping, a bad policy, uh, there's a concerted effort to reach some vote goal on some specific legislation. It may be a, majority vote at a school board meeting to adopt, temporary mask requirements, or it may mean, the veto of a governor, or it, may mean, the vote of a board of a business. But at the end of the day, there are, decision makers who make policy, and whether it's to move forward or to stop it. um, you know we in power mapping, we think about who the decision makers are, and who needs us to make a compelling case for why they should vote a certain way on a specific piece of legislation, and that's the purpose of mapping power and influence. So here are two examples. First one, how many of you on here know children? It looks like there are a few of us that might have kids in our families or networks. So let's talk for a minute about this one particular case study about Amy and her mom. So in this one scenario, you have Amy and her mom out running errands on a Saturday when Amy sees the most awesome bike in the world in a store window. And we want to take some time to flesh out some details about why Amy wants this bike and how she might go about convincing, her mom to buy it. So, in this situation, who is the decision maker? Go ahead and chime in the chat box with who you think the decision maker is. All right. Mom, looks like there's consensus on mom or dad, right? Or consensus on mom, it looks like. Yeah, definitely mom looks like is the consensus here. All right, so let's go with mom as the decision maker for right now. Now we're going to imagine we're Amy in this scenario, the kid, and make some arguments. So what are some of Amy's arguments for why mom should get this bike for her? What does the decision maker stand to gain if Amy gets this bike? Go ahead and chime in with your ideas. Oh yeah, a lot of real convincing arguments here coming in from Amy. All right, so now if you were Amy and you made an ask of the decision maker mom, and you've articulated this argument, but the decision maker still says no, what do you do next? Feel free to speak up or chime in. I'll pay for it. So Jenny says find another way. What would the other way be? What if you've exhausted all your arguments with mom? Ask why. Okay. Put together a PowerPoint protest. Okay, you're getting into tactics. So you've thrown every argument, you've done every PowerPoint, you've given the amazing spreadsheet for mom. None of it's working. You've protested this not working. So you have just exhausted everything and you cannot convince mom. So it looks like Kiana says go to dad. All right. So if you were Amy, what kind of ask would you make to dad? What does the other parent stand to gain if Amy gets her bike? Got some feedback in here like learn more about why she's saying no. Is she scared anyone will get hurt? Let's go get a helmet and pads. I like the Dag, you're clearly a better argument. Okay. All right. So in this scenario, who is, you've got mom as the decision maker, dad as an influencer. The point of this little thought process is taking the time to understand, in any effort to try to influence shaping policy, there is the decision makers and there are key influencers. And, an advocacy campaign is about developing a strategy to persuade the decision maker, by using some key influencers as messengers, oftentimes if direct advocacy isn't successful. So let's look at another example real quick. How many people are familiar with the Montgomery Bus Boycott? Who can tell us a little bit about what happened in this situation? And I guess go ahead and feel free to just speak up on the yay. Anybody want to tell us a little bit about the Montgomery Bus Boycott? No takers? All right. So, well, in this example, let's talk about identifying decision makers and influencers in another approach at trying to achieve social change. We like to think about strategy as using resources that you have to using resources to create power you need to get the change that you want. And the Montgomery Bus Boycott is a really good example of this strategy to achieve a goal. And so let's think for a minute about some of the pieces of what happened here. So what was the change that the boycotters wanted initially? Go ahead and chime in the box. Desegregation of buses. What was the resources that they had? Or what were the resources that they had? At first glance, it may not seem like there was a lot of resources, but what did they do? Economic power, strength in numbers, absolutely. And so the resource that they had was that they had strength in numbers, many people who were paying customers of the bus authority who wanted this change. How did they turn their resource into power? They got a bunch of folks to withhold their bus fare from the bus authority. How did this give them power? The bus authority wanted to be as profitable as possible, and the boycott made them lose money. They became willing to change their policy in order to get what they wanted, which was more money. So the point of all of this is that for every goal that we have, there are both there are decision makers and influencers, and we can persuade folks by appealing to their own self-interest. And the purpose of power mapping is spending some time looking at who your decision makers are and mapping out who influences them, and where their power comes from, and finding out what you can do to influence who has leverage on your decision makers. And what we learned from Amy and her family is that for every goal that we want to achieve, there are decision makers and influencers. What we learned from the Montgomery Bus Boycott is that we can persuade decision makers by using influencers to persuade them, or appealing to their self-interest and showing that they can get what they want by giving us what we want. So so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and say that the next step in this exercise is picking a particular lawmaker and doing breakout groups to try and ask some questions to map the power of a particular decision maker in your state that you want to focus on. And let me throw up on the screen how this works and share with you all the handout that goes with this. And I figured what we could do is, go into breakouts in a minute, and you all can take some time to talk amongst yourselves about, who is somebody that needs to be influenced in your state that's a decision maker, or who is a decision maker in your state that needs to be influenced, who influences them, and just work through some of the questions that are a part of this process. um, and and so the what you have on the screen is an example of part of a power map where you rank folks on a scale on how much influence they have on the decision maker and how much they are with you or against what you want. And this could be organizations, it could be individuals, it could be donors, it could be friends of people who are on the soccer little league team or soccer team with the decision makers kids or whatever. But this is where you map out the organizations and people who have influence over a um, particular person. And so let me pull up on the screen real quick some of the questions, and then we can go into a breakout and actually try this exercise. Give me 1 second. All right, so these are a couple handouts that we will provide, but and I'll put the link in the chat box. But in your breakout group, you can take a minute to, brainstorm a decision maker, what the action you want, what are some of their key motivations that you think they have, and then look through just some of the questions and take a few minutes to take a stab at answering some of them. Where does this person currently stand? What are some prior statements? Where do they live now? It's first is just understanding what you know about this person, uh, and and then what groups might influence them. And then the second part of this is taking a minute to map out and understand what the major motivations are for this decision maker. And then the final part is actually plotting on the map, who has the most influence and how much are they with you or against you, who has the least influence, how much they are with you or against you. And part of the advocacy campaign work is looking to see who has high influence but is against you, and asking yourself what tactics could be used to include those folks in your advocacy or break those people off from being opponents. For example, if you have a decision maker who you think that folks in the business community are a particularly large influencer on, then part of the advocacy work may be cultivating business owners to do your press event who are speaking up for COVID protections because that's good for economic recovery or whatever. Um, and and then the next part of the question is for folks who have less influence but who are with you. What can you do to grow their influence? And that a lot has to come from organizing. Growing your list of supporters who are speaking up and driving up the number of people doing advocacy. And so you can use this to kind of think through some of those tactics. So I'm gonna share the link on this and throw us into breakout groups to take 15 minutes and work on this on your own with some partners. So give me just a minute to share these two documents. Okay. So that Dropbox has two documents that you can use in the breakout. We will do a breakout for 15 minutes where everybody can look at the handout and work through it in small groups, and then we'll come back in 15 minutes and debrief. So, here are some questions just to think about. One is, one, knowing what policy change you want, knowing who makes the decision, and then mapping out what you know about the decision makers and who can influence them. And a question would be, can you build relationships with those who have the most influence and who are likely to work with us to help persuade the decision maker? How could you leverage each other's resources to make more influence? Is it events, shared budgets? Is it organizing? Is it growing the list of supporters? Is it going from 100 petition signers to 1,000? What does it take to do that? And with those who are influential and against us, what kind of relationship would be valuable to build with folks in those constituencies to weaken their influence, or who could serve as validators for your message? Kind of like what we talked about earlier. If if you know that donors are probably the most influential thing for an elected policymaker, are there donors that you could contact to speak up or break off? Or are there things you can do to weaken the influence of the donors, on your decision maker? And so those are just some questions to think about. The next part of this is thinking through effective tactics, and effective tactics to influence your decision maker is a combination of both. It motivates them and it's a worthwhile use of resources. And so a couple questions is, does anyone, I guess, have an example of a tactic that might not be effective at influencing the decision maker? Or has anybody seen that happen before? I guess go ahead and chime into the chat box. I guess some examples of ineffective tactics at influencing decision makers, and then I can share a couple. Emails, yes, yeah, that could be it. Never respond. Perfect. Yeah, so threats. Yep. So I think one thing is, I think, just acknowledging that when it comes to considering the tactics we use to move a decision maker, a good question to always start with is, does it motivate them? And do you have the resources, or can you put together the resources to leverage it? And if the answer to either question is no, then it's probably not a great tactic. And in a couple ways to think about this is, back when Tennessee, there was a campaign to try to expand Medicaid here in Tennessee. There was a group that put billboards up on the interstate calling on folks to make phone calls to a specific lawmaker. And, was that particularly effective? At the time, it seemed like there was no way of knowing how many people actually called the lawmaker. It wasn't clear that the lawmaker cared if they got phone calls from people who were not actually their constituents. And it did raise the question, like, could the money spent on billboards been more effective invested somewhere else? So, in that situation, you might answer that with no, it's not an effective tactic. When the news media wrote a story about the launch of a billboard campaign pressuring the lawmaker, created negative press coverage. Did that influence the lawmaker? Maybe, but at the end of the day, obviously it wasn't enough because we haven't expanded Medicaid here. But the point is, the power mapping research helps you begin to flush out some of the intelligence that you need to understand to think to inform the tactics you might use to try to pressure your decision makers. Um, Also, strong tactics on a calendar create a drumbeat of action. So, why might that be important? So, go ahead and chime in uh, with any feedback you have on why a strong drumbeat of action might be important. Creates urgency. Kiana, good. What else? Any constant reminders? Yep. So, every action ideally is a part of a broader campaign that has, peaks and drum beats to keep the heat on and pressure building. In this sample calendar on your screen, you see a variety of different tactics, some ongoing, some smaller, some big days of action in coordination with partners. And we use ideally a lot of different tactics to create an ongoing drumbeat that makes it visible to the decision maker, day in and out, that that pressure is building. Uh, and uh, and so a lot of times what we'll do is we'll look at the calendar ahead and try to see if there are just make up moments to be peaks that we can build towards. And so if you got 1,000 petitions to your decision maker now, is it saying, well, maybe we have 2,000 next time, and a big day of action to go out and collect a bunch of signatures all over the state together on one day, for example. The So now I'm going to just jump to some debrief questions, and I guess open it up to folks. Well, right, Kate's right. Yeah, it underscores no one event or tactic will do it all. Thumbs up on that. And so let's go ahead and take a minute and just talk this out loud and debrief both the exercise and some of these last questions on the slide. But basically, are there tactics that you could use over the next month to influence, to build influence and power of your constituency? Are there tactics that could be used to pull folks from influential constituencies to be validators for your effort? Are there tactics to build power and or influence? And what might those be? So just debrief for a minute. What do you all think? Some of the answers to these questions might be for you in your state or country. Feel free to chime in the chat box or just speak up. Plug for the calendar. Cool. All right, I know time's running short, so I'm gonna move on real quick to the debrief of this one. I'm curious for folks just to time in the chat box with what did you learn from this? Was it helpful? Was it not helpful? Too basic? Too confusing? Biggest takeaways? What takeaways most relevant? Or what do you think the biggest challenge will be for you on this? And does anybody see any opportunities to use this in the work that you're fighting for right now? Feel free to go ahead and speak up or throw it into the chat box. And while folks are doing that, the shared documents, I think they are good for any decision maker at any level. Whether you're talking about elected officials or folks in organizations. And so it takes time and it changes. And so no expectation that anybody was able to figure this out in the breakout group, but hopefully it arms you with some stuff to be helpful down the road.
It would seem to me that one of the key things is that there seems to be a consensus narrative in the country that's developed um, that is not one that is impelling people to action. Um, and I know that varies in different parts of the country, but it's almost like that narrative seems to be the driver um, of action, and how the narrative is composed and could be influenced seems like a big question. Like, it seems like there's plenty of information to show that there need to be mitigations and that the pandemic is hardly over. However, it seems like that does not make it into the 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 kind of current narrative on the ground, at least here in Philadelphia, that I seem to live in.
Well, I would agree with you completely on that, and I'll give you one example. In Tennessee, our governor passed the buck on any mitigation efforts initially to counties and said it should be a targeted, more local approach. Refused to do anything. The counties, not having any cover from the governor to do the right thing, said, well, they're going to leave the decision up to the health departments. The health department said, well, it's really up to the county. And both end up saying, well, it's up to the individual schools. And then at a top level, you have the governor, right, saying it's every parent's individual choice what people should do. And so there's been a big passing of the buck that has made the decision making that really could have happened at multiple levels, completely avoided at all levels. And so, school board, individual schools can take some action. So too can counties. So too could the state. But everybody's kind of abdicated their responsibility. And you're kind of getting at a question we'll get to in the next section around narratives. But, practically speaking, we had a school board meeting a couple months ago where that was supposed to talk about extending temporary mask mandates that ended up talking all about critical race theory. And so, but you could use a worksheet like this to try to answer some questions that might, arm a local team with what could be some tactics to go make the conversation at those school board meetings more focused on mitigation efforts rather than critical race theory. And so it's you're raising a big problem that is I think addressed that requires a conversation about what it takes to scale things, and that we'll get into that in a second. But that's a good. I think you're right. All right, seeing lots of great feedback in the chat. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next section. So let me kill this, and you all can grab some water and stand up for a second while I figure out how to change the screen here. Let's see. All right, I'm going to try to pick up the pace as well, and so I may expedite I'll expedite this next concept, and just send you all the materials to dig into. So. Here we go. All right. So the next organizing topic we're going to talk about is the neighborhood team model or community team model. And we just finished talking about how knowing the policy we want to change, knowing what influences a decision maker, ultimately comes down to tying together a string of tactics that build over time. I mean, it's a lot of work, to grow a movement to get a big job done. And so the team model, or distributed teams, is an approach to organizing that that tries to scale work by distributing responsibility for including others in advocacy. And so I'm going to take a minute and kind of go through this deck and explain a little bit about how it's used. But the purpose is, understand why we use the team model, how we use it, where it might be used to make sense, and how to use this approach in building and growing a team. All right, so I guess a couple questions just to start things off would be, who wants to throw out some characteristics of a good team and some characteristics of a not so good team? Go ahead and throw that in the chat box. So whether it's been in work or for fun, or school or whatever, what are some things that what are some characteristics of a good team, and what are some characteristics of a not so good team? Collaborative, everybody motivated to reach a similar goal, good communication, good team members have diverse members, absolutely. All right, cool. So whether you're volunteering, whether you're at work, you know what it feels like to be a part of a good team, and we probably all know what it feels like to be a part of a not so good team. So let's talk for a minute about different models of leadership, and why some models might not work, or why some approaches to leadership may work better than others. So on your screen now is the dot in the middle type of leadership. This is where you have a leader and who has everybody coming to them for direction and support all the time. And there are probably times that we all feel like this dot in the middle. But let me ask you all some questions about why doesn't this model of leadership or advocacy and organizing, why does this model not work? Go ahead and chime in the chat box about why this model not work. If the leader's the person in the middle and the arrows are supporters and volunteers out there, people in a Facebook chat group just wanting to, see their state do the right things to keep kids safe in school. So in this scenario, how does it feel to be the leader? You're burning out, overwhelmed, doesn't feel like you're able to make things big enough to get the job done. All right. And how does it feel to be an arrow? How does it feel to be somebody out there in a Facebook group wanting to just, see the right things happen in your community, signed a petition, but, don't know what to do next? Yep. You're waiting for the leader to act. You're waiting for somebody to call you back and give you direction. It's, frustrated, aimless. All those things are true. So here's another approach that sometimes, here's another approach to leadership. Why does this model not work? And has anybody ever experienced this kind of leadership or been a part of a team like this? So how does it feel to be the leader? How does it feel to be a supporter or a volunteer out there? Not coordinated. Yep. Not moving in the same direction, looks confusing. You got some people over here, doing a one-off action on the calendar and then evaporating. There's, some people maybe did a power mapping and are doing the things that might influence the decision maker, and other people may be, contradicting that effort. Who knows? So this model doesn't work for all of those reasons, right? So this is what a team model or a team approach to organizing looks like. And what are your thoughts about why a distributed leadership approach to advocacy and the work that we're doing? Why do distributed teams like this? Why might this work? In the middle you have the organizer. Surrounding the organizer, you've got a leader. That leader is supporting team members, and that team is supporting more supporters and volunteers out there. So let's talk about this for a minute. What's happening in this situation, and why might this work? Go ahead and chime in the chat box, or feel free to speak up.
Yeah, so everyone here looks like the one organizer has like a center, like a circle of connected people to them. So everybody's on the same page. And then that person is helping lead a group. So the efforts are all getting done, but multiple people are participating in an organized way. So it doesn't feel disjointed. It looks like it's one cause, and it's nice.
It's absolutely, yeah. And that it is, you're right on. It's so in this model there are clear lines of communication. There is sustainable ratios of support. So in this scenario, if somebody signs a petition, they actually get a call back, because rather than 100 people, rather than one person being responsible for following up with 100, you've got 4 people responsible for 10 each or 20 each or whatever. So it's it takes it allows for more people to be engaged and supported in their participation. It also can survive changes. When you talk about work having to happen over a period of time, you are one sick kid away from having to step back for a couple of weeks and stepping out of advocacy. And so a distributed team can handle people coming and going more frequently. It's also empowering, right? Because there's lots of ways people can contribute. But if you don't have more people sharing responsibility for including people, then it's harder to support lots of different ways for people to participate. So this is a hierarchy, but it's a hierarchy not of command and control. It's a hierarchy of distributed decision making and coordination and communication and responsibility. So we will oops, hang on one second. Okay. So before the team model or approach to organizing work, volunteers had less ownership. There's people weren't always considered crucial ways to be a part of the work. Issue campaigns and electoral campaigns often were run by consultants and vendors, not volunteers and voters. Where there were staff, they felt overwhelmed. Where there weren't staff, you had people were overwhelmed. And all the things that everybody said earlier about it not being sustainable or working. And you see this a lot of times in advocacy, where folks with money airdrop into a state, throw up some billboards or ads for a couple weeks, and then it evaporates, and nothing's left behind. And so let's talk for a second about teams and issue advocacy like we're all doing today. And I'll share a very quick story on what this looked like. In a previous life, a long time ago, I was I got involved with the Obama campaign, and following that in 2008, became the lead organizer for Tennessee, working on healthcare. But when I got started in 2009, people were screaming about death panels, destroying America, how terrible the Affordable Care Act was going to be. We had one small team in Nashville, and it took a month to follow up with a couple thousand people, and there were more people wanting to be involved than we had the ability to follow up with. So folks were frustrated. There wasn't support. There wasn't direction, and but we began organizing distributed volunteer teams around the state, where volunteers took responsibility for following up with other volunteers, getting to know them well enough to figure out how to include them, following this model. And by October 2012, we had 36 teams of volunteers around the state who supported the involvement of 600 volunteers, who recruited 1,200 volunteers to show up at events, who followed up with 176,000 supporters in that month, and those teams did a lot of great organizing and advocacy work. And the point of this is that the team model approach to supporting the involvement of others, helps grow the participation and engagement of other folks. So, the rest of this deck, I'm just going to kind of hit some highlights on that you all are free to dig into later. But it talks more about why it makes sense. It also goes through some Q&A about like what are the parts of a team or what makes a team. What are some of the critical roles that need to be filled? Yeah. So obviously, great chiming in there, Jane. That's right. And so I think probably the most important thing is that there is no perfect structure, but good teams do have clear roles. And when we have built teams in advocacy, we built teams as being responsible for a specific geographic territory. And it wasn't about building a team that only represented like East Nashville or West Nashville. It was about building a group of people who felt responsible for supporting the participation of people in a specific area. So that, if, 100 people signed up in, if 500 people signed up in Nashville, that's too much for any one person to follow up. But if there was a team responsible for supporting the involvement of 100 people in East Nashville and 100 people in West Nashville, then like you could take the big number and divide it up and make sure that people who wanted to be involved were being supported and followed up with. Okay, so let's start with one other role. So the team coordinator role, if a big part of building a team is finding the person who will take responsibility for being a primary point of contact, they're following up with other people, so as you build teams and try to identify team coordinators who will support others, what are you looking for? And I think taking a minute to think through what qualities you're looking for in a potential volunteer team coordinator is the first step in building out a team. Ideally, this is somebody who's not afraid to pick up the phone and get to know people well enough to know how to include them. Because you got some folks who, they'll never want to speak to the press, intimidated by media work. Other people who, would, love doing digital organizing. Some folks great at data. Some people are willing to make phone calls. There's lots of roles to fill, but somebody has to share the responsibility for getting to know people well enough to know how to include others. But so let me ask you this. If you get a bunch of supporters in a room and you ask who wants to lead, is the person who jumps up and says they want to be the leader always the right person to be the leader? Does anybody ever see that go horribly wrong? So I'm going to give one example of the approach to filling roles that's rooted in some of this organizing training that I think is really important. And this is one of my favorite analogies on the screen. But whether you're talking about a team coordinator or, a digital coordinator who, shares your petitions online, or a press coordinator who organizes like media events or whatever, regardless of the role that you end up coming up with, there is an approach to building out and identifying your roles that focuses on, not just picking people based on what they volunteer for, but having a little bit more intentional approach to getting people in the right role. So, so here's a question. I mean, if you're a soccer coach, what are 5 steps you might need to take in order to build an amazing soccer team? Do you bring everybody on the soccer field and just say who wants to be captain? Yeah, I mean, does that ever work? So if you want to build a good team, what are some of the steps you might go through first? Make sure they have training. What else? Identify their skill sets. Yep. What else? Yeah, make sure they even want to play soccer. I mean, anybody been a part of a team where it seems like somebody was showing up for a different game? So, right, all of y'all are thinking through the right things. So, the first step is initial outreach. Finding out who are the people in your town or community who even want to play soccer. And do you take somebody's word for it that they are the best player in town? Step one is building your supporter list, building the list of people who even want to play soccer with you. The next part is engagement. You put folks through different drills and experiences to find out, through trials. You let people try out different things to see the things that they like doing and are good at, and bring them fulfillment. A lot of times when it comes to volunteer work, people, are worried about asking others to do stuff. But for one person, but everybody's different. For some people, the invitation to do something is the thing that gives them purpose and fulfillment. And so creating different ways for people to try out different responsibilities lets people kind of go through an experience and helps you see what might be the right thing. Next step might be the actual formation of leadership. Now that people can see each other's strengths, there's more trust to pass the ball back and forth because people know who's showing up regularly. They know who's playing different roles, and then eventually you end up with a developed team that's playing well together, winning games, etc. But it had to go through a few phases first. Initial outreach, engaging, trying out, and then eventually beginning to form into a solid team. And so, team building and organizing is very similar to like team building in soccer or anything else. There are steps that there are different phases of a team coming together, and part of the work is ushering folks through work that helps them go from the first stage of a potential team, a group of supporters, into a team that's really working together and supporting others. And so I'm going to send this to you guys so you can go through it in more detail. But I'm going to stop here and just do a quick debrief about biggest takeaways. Is this helpful? And anything here surprise you or you find useful? And then I'll jump into the next thing so that we can keep moving. There are some materials that can be used to help think through how to do this. I think the most important takeaway is, create a vision for what a team would look like in your area and the roles that need to be filled, and what could you invite people to do to try out different roles before you give them away. Yes, we'll make all the slides available. All right, so I'm going to kill this one real quick and jump over into the last thing, and we'll move quickly on it. Just a second to pull it up. All right. All right, so this is the last big chunk, and this has to do with building relationships and stories in advocacy. And so let's we've talked about power mapping and tactics on a calendar over time to influence decision makers. We understand that takes scaling people who are responsible for supporting advocacy in order to do that over time and include more people. So we've talked about team building. So the next section has to do with building relationships to build teams and stories in building teams and advocacy. So the first question is, or some of the goals are going to be understanding why we use stories to build relationships and how to incorporate that in relationship building and advocacy, how to have conversations that build trust and relationships with supporters, and hopefully leave excited about trying this out. And then we've got some handouts that you can go use. The first question though is, and feel free to chime into the chat box, what is it you're trying to build with supporters, or what is it you're trying to do? It might be different in different states or countries, but at the end of the day, there's something fairly similar across all of the spaces, regardless of where you are. So no matter what policy you're trying to change, no matter who you're trying to influence, there's something that you need from other supporters, who want to play soccer along with you. What is it? Go ahead and throw your ideas in the chat box. You need supporters winning. You need to help those who are more silent to draw them out to be more vocal and more involved. Absolutely. All those things are right. And, what does it take to do those things, right? if we want to see supporters becoming leaders, taking responsibility for guiding the involvement of others as volunteers, if we want to see people speaking up, at the end of the day, what is it that you need from other supporters in order to do that? You need commitment. You need their willingness to take the time and to commit the time and the willingness to do that with you, right? And so, I guess so the next question is, what creates commitment, and what are some examples of where commitment exists elsewhere in your life? And what do those things have in common? And go ahead and throw that into the chat box. Being a parent, kids, commitment exists there. What other examples? Or what other examples do you have of specific people that you have trust with in your own lives? What do some of those examples all share in common? So you have commitment with your kids, you have commitment with elderly parents, at your job, with folks in your household, right? Shared values, absolutely. There's relationships. There are relationships at the root of all these commitments. And when you think back for a minute on challenges that you've had in your own lives, time that you needed help or advice, time you struggled with something, time that you asked for somebody to do something for you, who did you call? And at the end of the day, people we trust, we get the benefit of the doubt. We show up for them. We commit our time there. And so what does all this have to do with building volunteer teams that will engage thousands of supporters in advocacy? It means that, if we want to build strong teams, it begins with building strong relationships with each other, with supporters. And so taking the time to get to know each other well enough to understand what our shared values are, other people's interests and motivations and skills. And so, one of the most important things you can do to grow from wherever you are now to a stronger team in the future is devoting time to intentional relationship building with other supporters. And so I saw this in the chat box, but strong relationships include things like shared values, shared goals, diversity, because we need help from every aspect of the community. And ultimately, commitment and action make a relationship real. And so, some important elements of a strong relationship is that, or the keys to success on this is that when we create strong relationships with folks in the community, that's the first step of building a team, and then ultimately for a team to succeed in empowering other people in the community, there has to be a commitment and trust. And strong relationships are built on knowing details, shared values, shared goals, commitment to each other. And so there's two tactics that are key ingredients to doing this, and it's personal stories and intentional relationship building meetings. And so the first one, personal stories. So chime in the chat box your answer to this question. Where and why do we tell stories, and why might that be helpful in building relationships? Or start with just, why do we even tell stories in general? Stories are where you share and communicate emotions. What else? Or where else do you tell stories? or where else are stories told? Yet to communicate a purpose. Right. Connect with people, sense of history. Absolutely. All those things are true. So, stories are, they're how people learn. They're, you see them in church, you see them at school. It shows values. It helps people recognize what you care about or been through. Our relationships are built on stories and experiences with each other. and I'll give I'll give a quick example. So this is my son Sam, and we used to not have clean water at a house that we lived in years ago. We lived in a small community, 30 homes, a little bit of a rural area, all on well water. And one day, we were washing clothes and washing dishes, and everything was brown. And it turned out that the wells were basically drying up. And it turned out that all the homes in this community had wells that were drying up. There was, no water lines to this area at all. And so I thought, surely we could get water lines here. And went with my neighbor to a water utility board meeting and said, hey, what would it take to get some water lines to this community because all the wells are drying up? And this utility board said, sorry, we can't do that. It's too expensive and nobody really wants it in the community. And so, I talked to my neighbor and I said, well, that doesn't seem right. I'm pretty sure if they can bring water lines around this community of 30 homes to the multi-million-dollar mansions on the other side of town, that surely they could bring them down to this, community of 30, 40 homes that, don't have water lines or fire hydrants. And, and he agreed. And we thought, well, let's go talk to the neighbors and find out, if they really want water lines too. And so we went and talked to all the neighbors and got a petition and went back to the utility board and said, hey, we talked to everybody. Everybody said they really do want water lines. And they would sign up for water if they had it. And then the utility board said, well, it's still just, it's too expensive. And even if we brought it down there, nobody would sign up for it. And so we left thinking, well, that's not right. Surely there's something we can do about that. So we went back to all the neighbors and said, how much can we raise to, pay for some of the pipe and use that to put pressure on these folks to install it. And so we raised some money within the community, showed back up at the board meeting and said, we've raised a little bit of our own money to go towards this. You just need to go in on it and bring water lines to everybody. And they said, well, we're not going to do it. It's still too expensive. And then we thought, well, that's not right. Let's go get some reporters involved and let them know how terrible you all are. And then we sent out some press releases, got them some press, and then got a local foundation willing to donate fire hydrants. And then we came back and said, we have fire hydrants that will be donated from a foundation, a bunch of reporters asking you questions now. And, some of the money already raised to do it, you all should bring water lines. Eventually they did it. And, there's now water lines in the community and fire hydrants and, clean water for folks in the neighborhood. So that is an example of a story that, one might tell. So let's look at another story. Is everybody familiar with the tortoise and the hare? What are some pieces of this particular story, or what are the parts of of the story of the tortoise and the hare? What makes this an effective story, or any story? Go ahead and chime in into the chat box. I'm gonna speed things up a little bit just because I know we're running out of time. So the elements of a story are, there's detail that help draw you in. It describes characters and provides details. There's a sequence of events that draw you into the story. There's a challenge, a decision point that's made, a conflict to overcome that helps teach a lesson or a moral. And there's a resolution, a result, and a theme or a moral. And that, and the reason why that matters is, decisions we make communicate values, and people build relationships based on identifying values you share between one another. And so, where and why would we use stories in building volunteer teams? And so the next step of this would be brainstorming that with folks, talking it through. And the reason and why we would use stories in building teams is that it's what helps us connect us with our supporters. When we take the time to get to know each other and the stories that motivate folks, it's what helps bond people together and helps build commitment in a team to get big work done. And so stories are used in press conferences. They're used in building teams. They're used in emails to lawmakers and throughout organizing. The next thing that you all would have is there's an exercise and some worksheets that you can use to basically craft stories that you could use in press events and in building your team. So I will send that curriculum around. And the last thing, which I will just throw up on the screen and just go through real fast, is intentional relationship buildings. And if we want to build a relationship to build a team, we need to meet with people one-on-one and not just in groups. Why might that matter? Why would it be important to meet with somebody one-on-one? I mean, it could be one-on-one online or in person, but why is it important to meet with somebody one-on-one if you want to build relationships and build a team? So you would want to, give them time. Yep, more personal. Yeah, can you really effectively get to know somebody and them get to know you? In a giant group setting. Right. Sometimes people are more quiet in a group. And so, right, if we want to build relationships, it's typically done one-on-one. It needs to be scheduled and not off the cuff. Why might that matter? And only because we're running out of the clock, I will expedite this, but it will, but it matters because if you walk in the door with a bag of groceries and have 3 screaming kids, in the background, you may not be particularly in the best mindset to have a relationship building conversation with somebody. And so by scheduling it, you can, and setting expectations that, you want to, I know you're a supporter and want us to mitigate, COVID in our community. And I'm a supporter and I want to mitigate COVID in the community. And you've got some resources and I've got some resources. It may not be a whole lot, but if we both commit to sitting down and taking an hour to get to know each other a little bit more, then we can better understand how we could potentially work together to do more together. And so that's why you want to have it scheduled. It's typically 45 minutes to an hour. Why might it be longer or shorter? Typically not shorter because it takes time to really get to know folks, and not longer because, we don't have a limited time. And so there's a great training curriculum out there on just like what are the steps or process you might go through to build intentional relationships with folks. But it's a tactic in organizing, and it's crucial to building teams. And so we would make a plan. Every time somebody signs a petition, and that there's a supporter, that's somebody that someone taking some time to get to know is good, because it is where you can find the power you need to build your team. All right. So that is all I've got this for this crash course. I've got bunches of documents I'm happy to share, and I know this was a little rough, but hopefully the goal was to give you all a very big picture tour of a variety of things that could be helpful. And I'm going to stop there and see what you all thought. Questions, feedback, take it away. Are there things that you all found particularly helpful, things that you wish you had more time to heartily hear about? Lay it on.
So the group that I'm involved in, we're only about 3 weeks old, and I can see that we're quite haphazard at the moment and haven't really got a structure, and it's been really helpful to I guess I'd forgotten that these things are needed to be doing, and when you're sort of swept up with all the actions that you're doing, you have to make time to do all of this to really actually make them more effective. So yeah, I really appreciated it. It made me see what next to do to get us in a position where we're more effective as a team, and just the relationships. Building relationships, I think, is the most important thing out of it. I think just because we've got about 80 probably on our mailing list now. It's growing, and so really getting to know who those people are. I don't know how we're going to do that because they're still sort of really shy about kind of committing. I don't know. People are interested but shy about committing. So yeah, that's something we need to.
That's amazing, and that's an amazing start. And I will say this. I have always been in a state that has not had sufficient resources to do this work on any particular large scale, and there was always this tension between reacting to the crisis of the moment and kind of the slow and steady building work that builds a team. And I think part of it is embracing a mindset that just acknowledges that there is always more work to do than you have the resources to accomplish. And if you can admit that to yourself, then it's also quite freeing, because then you can take more risks, because it's, you don't have anything to lose. And so the way I would think about it is that tension you feel, that pressure you feel where you have more people who want to be involved than you can support, it is an opportunity to invite somebody else to lead. It is, we used to say that, there's more people who want to be involved than we have the ability to follow up with. So why not invite others to share that load with you? And when you do, that's when you begin to see, who else can lead with you.
Yeah, I think there are definitely.
And then, the only other thing, I'm sorry.
There are definitely others in the group who, they have specific skills that I can identify already. I haven't really had those intentional kind of relationship building conversations. But yeah, I think that's what we'll be doing next, and really kind of getting into the nitty gritty about what, share values, share goals, and then going from there. And yeah, handing some of the jobs over and saying, this is something you can do. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, my favorite story related to that is we had a team in Middle Tennessee where they were focused on having relationship building one-on-ones with folks. And, I remember this one person saying, I think I found somebody who can do our data. Somebody who will help do data entry and log our petitions and whatever. She's a retired CPA accountant. I've, got this great idea that this is a perfect role for this person. Only after they spent time getting to know them that they realized that she was absolutely totally burned out from sitting behind a computer all the time. And the thing that she loved more than anything was the PTA work she did for her kids when they were in school. And this woman in particular ended up becoming a volunteer regional lead for us that basically built 12 teams of supporters around her that ultimately ended up engaging thousands of people. And so it's it's always good to remember that not to put folks in a box or assume anything about them before taking that time to get to know folks.
Mm. Yeah.
And then my last rant, and then I'll stop, is there was another example of where somebody who they never came to any events. Everybody thought this person was a flake, and was frustrated because this person would come and go, and then somebody spent time and actually talked with her, found out she was a doctor in Antioch who had just started up her practice and was so busy and just was not able to come to anything, but she owned her own practice, and she's like, I can't be there, but I'm going to open up the office for you all to use it as a location, and provided the space for them to meet regularly. I mean, and so just another example of how you don't know what resources are there before you get to know folk. All right. Sorry. What else? All right.
Thank you so much. My dog's barking. My kid just got out of bed, so I'm going to keep it short, but because there's a lot of noise. But thank you so much. I think this was really helpful, and thank you for all the time you spent putting this together, and the explanations were awesome, and I can see a lot of ways we can work this into what we're doing now, and a lot of ways where I can use this information in the future. So thank you.
Cool. Y'all are welcome. I promise in years past I was much better at all this, and a little rusty and running on fumes, but I'm happy to share you all on the tons of drop boxes of stuff, and you all can take and run with it and do great things. And but I dropped my email in the chat box, and like I said, I'll throw more information at you than you ever imagined. So